I had spent 34 years making sure everyone else at that table had enough. Enough food, enough room, enough peace, enough grace. I ironed the tablecloth the night before. I drove 40 minutes to get the specific cranberry sauce my mother preferred, even though she had never once said thank you for it. I had set the table for 12 people, arranged the chairs so no one would feel left out, and held my breath through the whole afternoon just trying to keep everything calm. And then my mother looked at me across the table, in front of my aunts, my cousins, my grandmother, and my younger brother's new girlfriend who had never met any of us, and she said the words I had never expected to hear out loud. She said I was the burden, that I was the reason the family could never just enjoy things, that every holiday felt heavy because of me. I did not cry, I did not yell. I sat very still for a long moment, and then I said exactly 4 words, and everything in that room shifted. Before I tell you what those 4 words were, I want to ask you something. Think about the last time someone who was supposed to love you used a public moment to make you feel small. Think about whether you said something back or whether you swallowed it and kept serving the meal. I want you to stay with me through this whole story because what happened next was not something I planned. It was something I had been quietly building toward for years without even knowing it. And if you have ever been the one who kept showing up, keep listening. My name is Patricia. I am 34 years old, and for most of my life, I believed that love looked like sacrifice. I believed that if you gave enough, stayed quiet enough, helped enough, and caused as little disruption as possible, the people around you would eventually see your value. I believed that loyalty was its own reward. I believed that family, no matter how complicated, was worth protecting. I held on to all of those beliefs for a long time. I held on to them through missed birthday acknowledgments and one-sided phone calls and holidays, where I did all of the work and received very little of the credit. I held on to them through years of being the one everyone leaned on but no one truly saw. And then came that Thanksgiving. I want to tell you the whole story because the 4 words I said at that table did not come out of nowhere. They came from something I had spent years quietly preparing for without fully understanding that I was preparing at all. They came from a decision I had made slowly, privately, in the middle of ordinary mornings that I was going to stop shrinking. They came from the moment I finally understood that my mother did not see her words as cruel. She saw them as honest. And that distinction made everything make sense in a way it never had before. So let me start where it really starts, which is not that Thursday in November, but about 3 years earlier, on a night that most people would call unremarkable but that I still think about almost every day. It was a Tuesday in late October, and I had just driven my mother home from a doctor's appointment. She had been having some joint pain in her hands, and her regular doctor had referred her to a specialist on the other side of the city. My mother did not drive on highways, so I had taken the day off work to take her. I was 21 at the time and working at a dental office as a front desk coordinator. Taking the day off meant losing pay, which mattered because I was also helping cover part of the household expenses at home since my parents had been going through a rough patch financially. But I went. I always went. We sat in the waiting room for almost 2 hours. My mother complained about the chairs and the temperature and the parking situation and the fact that the magazines were old. I sat beside her and nodded and got her a cup of water from the cooler down the hall and found a better chair and said nothing that would start an argument. The appointment itself lasted about 20 minutes. The doctor said her condition was manageable with some exercises and anti-inflammatory medication. My mother seemed annoyed by this, as if a more serious diagnosis would have been more satisfying. On the drive home, I asked her if she wanted to stop somewhere for dinner since it was getting late and I had not eaten since a granola bar at noon. She said she was not hungry and wanted to go straight home. I said okay. When we pulled into the driveway, she got out of the car and walked to the front door. She did not say thank you, she did not say goodbye really. She said, "Make sure you lock your car, Patricia, because this neighborhood has been having problems." And then she went inside. I sat in the driveway for a few minutes. I was not devastated, I was something quieter than that. I was starting to understand something that I could not yet put into words. The closest I can get to it now is this: I was realizing that my mother received my care as if it were oxygen, not something she was grateful for, but something she simply expected to be there, something that would be there whether she acknowledged it or not, something that did not require a thank you because it was just the natural environment she moved through. That night I went home to my apartment, which was only about 10 minutes from my parents' house, and I sat on my couch and I wrote in a notebook. I did that a lot in those years. Not journaling exactly, more like trying to organize my own thoughts so they did not pile up inside me. What I wrote that night was, "She does not see what I do. She only sees what is missing when I do not do it." I did not know it then, but that sentence was the beginning of everything. My family is not what most people would call obviously toxic. We did not have screaming matches every weekend. My parents did not drink. There was no dramatic abuse history that I could point to and say that is where the damage came from. My family was more subtle than that, and subtle damage is in some ways harder to name because you spend so many years wondering if you're just being too sensitive. My mother, whose name is Donna, is a woman who has always believed that her children's purpose is to reflect well on her. Not to be happy necessarily, not to be healthy necessarily, but to be presentable. To be achievements she could mention at church or at her book club or at the neighborhood association meetings she took very seriously. My brother Marcus, who is 4 years younger than me, understood this instinctively and shaped himself accordingly. He learned early to perform success in the ways my mother valued. He wore the right clothes, dated the right kind of women, made jokes that made her laugh, and deferred to her in public in a way that she read as respect. Marcus was her pride, I was her project. The difference between being someone's pride and someone's project is this: pride you celebrate. A project you keep finding things wrong with. A project always needs more work. A project is never quite finished. A project is always one adjustment away from being acceptable. I was never quite the right daughter for my mother. I was too quiet when she wanted me to be sociable. I was too opinionated when she wanted me to agree. I chose a career path she found unglamorous. I did not marry early, which embarrassed her in circles where marrying early was considered a sign that a woman was properly lovable. I wore my hair in ways she criticized. I read books she thought were too serious. I had opinions about things she felt daughters were not supposed to have opinions about. I was, in her own repeated phrasing, a lot. But here is what I also was. I was the one who took her to doctor's appointments. I was the one who remembered her prescriptions. I was the one who organized the Christmas gift exchange every year because if I did not know one would and my mother would be upset about it in January. I was the one who called my grandmother every Sunday because my mother forgot to, and then my mother would mention in conversation that she had such a close family, everyone staying connected. I was the one who showed up early to every family event to help set up, and stayed late to clean, and drove relatives to the airport, and handled the seating chart at my cousin Vanessa's wedding when the planner dropped the ball 2 days before the event. I was useful, I was dependable, I was the one who held things together, and I was, apparently, the burden. I need to tell you about the years leading into that Thanksgiving, because they contain the layers that made my mother's words so specifically painful. When I was 26, I made a decision that I was very proud of. I had been working in dental administration for 5 years and I had saved carefully and I enrolled in a part-time business management program at the community college. I wanted to eventually open my own practice management consulting business, helping small healthcare offices run more efficiently. It was not a glamorous dream, but it was mine. It was specific and practical and I had a real plan for it. My mother's response when I told her was not congratulations. Her response was, "Do you really think you have time for that?" She said it in a tone that suggested she was worried about me, but the worry felt less like care and more like doubt wrapped in concern-shaped words. My father, who is a quieter man named Gerald who has spent 40 years mostly staying out of Donna's way, said, "That sounds smart, Patricia," and then went back to reading the newspaper. I did the program. I worked full-time and went to class twice a week and did my coursework on weekends. It took me 2.5 years. When I finished, my mother did not come to the small ceremony the program held. She said she had a prior commitment, which turned out to be a garden club event she could have rescheduled. Marcus came, which surprise. Me, he brought flowers and took me out to dinner, and it was one of the nicest evenings I had with my brother in years. I thought maybe Marcus and I were turning a corner. I started my consulting business at 29. It was small at first. I was working with 2 clients, both small dental offices I had connections with from my previous job. I worked from home. My mother told people I was freelancing, which she said in a tone that made it sound temporary and slightly embarrassing. I did not correct her in front of others, but I filed it away in the notebook I kept in my head. Over the next 4 years, the business grew. By the time I was 33, I was working with 11 regular clients across 3 states. I had hired 2 part-time contractors, and I had built a quiet, steady, genuinely profitable business. I had also moved from my small apartment into a house I bought on my own. A real house with a yard and a porch and room for the life I was slowly building. My mother visited the house once after I moved in. She walked through it with an expression I can only describe as looking for problems. She noted that the kitchen was smaller than she would have chosen. She said the neighborhood seemed fine, but that she hoped the schools were good even though I did not have children. She said the porch needed plants. She said the living room walls were too white. She stayed for about an hour and a half, and when she left, she said, "It is cozy, Patricia." Cozy, my house that I had bought, alone, with money I had earned, running a business she had told me I probably did not have time for. Cozy. I wrote that in my notebook too. The year I turned 33, my mother's health began to shift more seriously. Her joint issues became more consistent, and she was also dealing with elevated blood pressure that her doctor wanted to monitor carefully. She became more anxious about her health, which is understandable, and that anxiety made her more demanding of the people around her. My brother Marcus, who had always been very present in her good graces, began making himself subtly less available. He had married a woman named Sonia 2 years earlier, and Sonia was warm and kind but also had her own family with its own demands. Marcus had also taken a job that involved significant travel. None of these things were dishonest excuses exactly, but the effect was that Marcus was suddenly not the son who could take Donna to appointments or sit with her through her worried afternoons. He was the son who called every few days and took her to dinner once a month and sent nice gift baskets on holidays. He was still her pride. I was still her project. But now the project was also being asked to carry more of the practical weight. I said yes to most of it. I want to be honest about that. I said yes to driving her to appointments, and yes to helping her navigate her online insurance portal, and yes to calling the pharmacy when there was a billing issue, and yes to being the one who organized her medical files into a binder so she could bring it to specialist visits. I said yes because I am wired to say yes to people who need help, even when those people have not been kind to me. It is something I have worked hard on understanding about myself. It is not virtue exactly. It is a pattern that took me a long time to interrupt. During this period, there was a specific incident that I want to describe because it matters for what came later. My mother called me one afternoon in a state of real distress. She had received a bill from her insurance company that she did not understand, and she was convinced she was being overcharged, and she was spiraling into anxiety about what it would mean for her finances. I spent 2 hours on the phone with her that day. I walked her through the explanation of benefits document line by line. I called the insurance company on a three-way call and resolved the billing discrepancy, which turned out to be a coding error from the doctor's office. I handled everything. By the end of the call, my mother was calm. She thanked me, which was notable because she did not often do that. She said, "I do not know what I would do without you sometimes, Patricia." I remember exactly where I was sitting when she said that. I was at my desk, and it was almost 6 in the evening, and I had been supposed to finish a client report that afternoon but had not been able to because of the call. I thought about what she had said, and it felt almost good, almost like being seen. 2 days later, she was on the phone with my Aunt Rosemary, and I happened to be visiting, and I overheard her saying that Marcus had helped her sort out a confusing insurance bill. Just like that, transferred the credit, gave him the story to wear like a medal when he had not been present for a single minute of it. I did not say anything. I went home and I wrote in my notebook and I sat with it. The Thanksgiving where everything changed was 3Y. Years after that October drive home from the doctor. It was 3 years of patterns I could finally see clearly because I had been watching them carefully enough to trust what I knew. I was 34. My business was doing well. I had a life that was genuinely mine, built by my own choices and my own effort, and I had done it while also continuing to show up for my family in ways that were becoming increasingly one-directional. I had agreed to host Thanksgiving that year. This itself was something I want you to understand. I had agreed to host it at my house, the house my mother had called cozy. I had said yes because my parents' dining room was not large enough for everyone, and because no one else had volunteered, and because I genuinely do not mind hosting when I have enough notice and the ability to plan. I had spent the week before preparing. I had done the shopping on Monday, the prep work on Wednesday, and I had been up since 6 in the morning on Thanksgiving Day. By the time people started arriving at 2 in the afternoon, I had cooked a full meal for 12 people, set the table with the cloth napkins my mother liked, put together a small centerpiece, and kept the house warm and clean and welcoming. The guests that year were my parents, my brother Marcus and his wife Sonia, my Aunt Rosemary and her husband, two cousins named Delia and Frank with their spouses, my grandmother on my mother's side, who we called Gran B, and Marcus's wife Sonia's younger sister Pam, who was visiting from out of town and had nowhere else to go for the holiday. 12 people total. Everything was going reasonably well through the first part of the afternoon. Granby was seated at the head of the table because she was the eldest, and everyone agreed that was right. The food was good. The conversation was moving around the table in the way it does at big family meals, small clusters of talk that overlap and blend. I had not sat down for more than 10 minutes before I was up again, getting something, checking something, refilling something. My cousin Delia at some point said, "Patricia, sit down, you are making me tired just watching you." And I laughed and said I was almost done. And I sat for a few minutes, and then someone needed something and I got up again. The moment happened during a lull. Gran B had made a comment about how much she appreciated the effort that had gone into the meal, and there had been a round of agreement. And then the conversation drifted toward the holidays in general, and someone mentioned how stressful the season could be, and my Aunt Rosemary said something about how the key was to not let things get too complicated. And then my mother, Donna, said something that was framed as an explanation but was really an accusation. She said that the reason our holidays always felt a little heavy was that some people in the family had a tendency to make things about themselves. She said it in a light tone, conversational, the way people say things they have been wanting to say when they finally feel they have an audience. And then she looked at me, not a glance, a look, the kind of look that confirms the subject. She said, "Patricia, you have always had a way of making every gathering feel like a lot, like there is always some tension around you. I do not know if you realize it, but you are a bit of a burden on the energy of this family." The table went quiet. Not fully quiet, there were still small sounds, silverware, someone's chair shifting, Pam from out of town suddenly becoming very interested in her plate. But the attention in the room gathered into a single uncomfortable point, and that point was me. I felt the blood move in my face. I felt the specific heat of being publicly called something in front of people who were sitting in a house I had spent a week preparing, eating food I had spent a day cooking, sitting in seats I had arranged, eating off dishes I had washed the morning before. I was quiet for a moment, not because I was at a loss. I was not at a loss, I was deciding. I was choosing very carefully what to say next because I had learned that what you say in moments like these either closes the door or opens it wider, and I had been silent in these moments before and I knew exactly what that cost. I looked at my mother, I kept my face very calm, and I said 4 words quietly and clearly. I said, "Not anymore, thank you." And then I picked up my fork and I kept eating. I want to explain what those 4 words meant because they were not random. They were a sentence I had been building for a long time without knowing it. Not anymore meant I was done accepting that framing. I was done being the container for whatever my mother needed to put somewhere. I was done carrying the label of the difficult one, the heavy one, the one who makes things a lot, when the evidence of my life was sitting right there in the form of the food on that table and the clean dishes and the centerpiece. And the 12 people I had made comfortable in my home. Thank you was not sarcasm exactly, though I understand why it reads that way. It was acknowledgement. It was me saying, I heard you, I received your words, and I am choosing not to be changed by them. The table stayed quiet for another few seconds. Granby cleared her throat. Delia said something about the sweet potatoes. Sonia, Marcus's wife, very quietly touched my arm under the table. Marcus looked at his plate, my father looked at the wall, Rosemary looked at Donna, and my mother, Donna, looked at me with an expression I had not seen on her face in a long time. She looked uncertain. I have thought about that expression many times since then. My mother is a woman who has spent her entire life being sure about things. She is sure she is right, she is sure about what is appropriate, she is sure about what other people's behavior means and how it reflects on her. Seeing her uncertain was like watching a clock stop. It was jarring in a way that was not triumphant, it was just true, just real. Just a woman realizing that the person she had just spoken to was no longer adjusting themselves to fit what she had said. I did not make a scene, I did not cry, I did not deliver a speech. I finished Thanksgiving dinner with my family, cleared the table, and said my goodbyes with warmth because I am not a cold person and because my grandmother was there and I love her. When everyone left and my house was quiet again, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea and I did not feel angry. I felt, for the first time in years, entirely like myself. That night I made a decision. It was not a dramatic decision. It was not a plan for revenge or a letter I was going to send or a confrontation I was going to schedule. It was a simple and private decision. I was going to stop performing ease around people who caused me discomfort and then blamed me for not being comfortable enough. I was going to stop volunteering my time, energy, and presence in spaces where those things were taken for granted. I was going to redirect what I had been giving away without return. I wrote it in my notebook, I am not the burden, I am the resource they forgot to appreciate. And resources that are taken for granted do not disappear in anger, they simply become unavailable. The first change was small but significant. I stopped being the first to call. I had been calling my mother every 2 to 3 days for years, not because she asked me to, but because I had made it my habit to maintain the connection. I stopped initiating those calls. I was not rude when she called me. I picked up, I spoke kindly, I asked how she was. But I stopped inserting myself into her week as the person whose job it was to hold the thread. Within 3 weeks, she mentioned to Marcus that she had not heard from me much. He told me this because Marcus and I had begun talking more directly since Thanksgiving, which was an unexpected development I will come back to. My mother told Marcus she thought I was upset about something, but she could not think of what. She could not think of what, after calling me a burden in front of 11 other people. I let that sit. The next few months were a period of quiet rearrangement. I did not blow up relationships or make announcements. I simply stopped making myself available in ways that had never been reciprocated. I stopped offering to take her to routine appointments and let her figure out that Marcus was unavailable and that she needed to either ask me directly or make other arrangements. I stopped sending the weekly email that compiled family news and updates that I had been sending to the extended family for 3 years, because it was something I had started doing and no one had ever offered to take it over. I stopped being the person who remembered everyone's birthdays and arranged the card for Gran B's 90th birthday party. I said politely that I was too busy with work to organize it that year and suggested Rosemary might enjoy taking that role. Rosemary did not enjoy taking that role. The card arrived 4 days after Gran B's birthday and the party was smaller and less organized than usual. My mother called me to tell me this in a tone that implied it was my fault for not stepping in. I said, I am sorry to hear that, I hope Gran B still enjoyed her day, and I changed the subject. I want to be clear that I was not doing any of this cruelly. I was not trying to punish my family. I was trying to see what happened when the scaffolding came down, when the person holding the ceiling in place stopped holding it. Not to prove a point, but because I needed to know whether the ceiling would hold on its own or whether it would turn out that I had been the only thing keeping it up. The answer was somewhere in the middle, which is probably the most honest answer most family situations can give you. In February, about 3 months after Thanksgiving, something happened that and the stakes in a way I had not anticipated. My grandmother Grand B had a fall. She was not seriously injured, thankfully, but she fractured a small bone in her wrist and was shaken enough that the family began discussing what her living situation should look like going forward. Grand B had been living alone in a small house she had owned for 40 years, and the fall made it clear that some level of support was now necessary. This conversation happened in stages. First, it was a family group chat on the phone, which had previously been a space for holiday logistics and birthday announcements and the occasional photo of someone's meal. Now it became a space for opinions about Grand B's situation, most of which were large in theory and small in action. Rosemary said she thought Grand B should consider a senior living community and listed several that sounded lovely. Marcus said he agreed that something needed to change, but that he was traveling heavily until April and could not take point on researching options. Various cousins chimed in with supportive comments and very little concrete offer. My mother said this was a serious situation and the family needed to come together, which was the kind of statement that sounds like leadership but contains no actual action. I read all of this and did not immediately respond. I sat with it for a day, and then I thought about my grandmother who had showed up at my business certificate ceremony with a card that had $20 in it and a note in her handwriting that said, "I am proud of you, Patricia, you always find a way." I thought about how she had told me once, when I was about 12 years old and was upset that my mother had missed my school play, that some people love you from a distance and some people love you up close and both kinds are real but only one of them can hold your hand. Gran B had always been the hold your hand kind. I called her directly, not the group chat. I called her and I said, "Gran B, I want to help you figure out what you need, not what the family decides, what you need. Do you want to move somewhere new or do you want to find a way to stay in your house?" She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "Patricia, I want to stay in my house. I have lived in that house for 40 years and I would like to die in it if I can manage it." I said, "Then let us figure out how to make that possible." Over the next 2 months, I researched in-home care options, interviewed 3 agencies, consulted with her doctor, helped her install grab bars in the bathroom and a ramp at the back door, set up a medical alert system, and coordinated a visiting schedule with her neighbor Margaret, who was happy to check in twice a week in exchange for a small monthly payment that Gran B's savings could cover comfortably. I did all of this quietly, with Gran B's input at every step, without putting it in the group chat or announcing it to the family. I did not keep it secret, I simply did not perform it. When Rosemary eventually learned what had been arranged, she called to thank me and said the family was so lucky to have me. I said I was happy Gran B could stay in her home, and I meant it. My mother's response was more complicated. She was pleased Gran B was settled, but she seemed uncomfortable that she had not been the one to orchestrate it. She asked me with a careful tone why I had not included her in the process. I said I had done it because Gran B asked me to help her directly. I said it gently. I said it honestly. I said it in a way that did not leave room for revision. There was a pause, and then my mother said, "I suppose you had it handled." I said, "Yes, I did." Another small shift, another moment where the room felt different. The spring brought 2 things. The first was that my business landed its largest client yet, a regional network of family medicine offices that wanted help restructuring their administrative operations across multiple locations. It was the kind of contract that moved the business into a different category entirely. I hired a third contractor and started planning for a fourth. I was genuinely, verifiably thriving, not loudly but consistently and clearly. The second thing that came in the spring was a conversation with Marcus that I had not expected. Marcus called me on a Saturday morning in April. He said he wanted to talk, not about anything urgent, just to talk. Marcus and I had been on cordial terms for most of our adult lives, but we had not been close in a real sense since maybe our early 20s. He had drifted into my mother's orbit in a way that made me feel sometimes that our relationship was mediated through her approval. When she was pleased with me, Marcus was warmer. When she was critical, Marcus was more distant. I had noticed this pattern for years, but never named it to him directly. He started the conversation with small talk and then went quiet for a moment. And then he said, "Trisha, I want to talk about Thanksgiving. I want to tell you that what Mom said was wrong. I have been thinking about it since it happened, and I did not say anything that day, and I should have." I was not prepared for that. I stayed quiet for a moment. He said, "I have watched her do this to you for a long time. Say things that she frames as concern, but that are really about controlling how you see yourself. And I let it happen because it was easier for me to stay on her good side than to push back. That was not fair to you, and I am sorry." I want to be careful about how I describe what I felt in that moment because it was not simple. It was not uncomplicated relief. It was more like watching a very old knot finally get the right kind of pull. It did not undo the knot all at once, but it was movement, real movement. I told Marcus I appreciated him saying that. I told him I was not angry at him, but that I also needed to be honest that his silence over the years had mattered. That when you stay quiet in the face of something unkind, you make room for it to keep happening. He said he understood that and he was not asking me to dismiss it. He just wanted to say he was sorry and that he wanted to try to do better. Marcus and I talked for 2 hours that day. It was the longest real conversation we had probably ever had. I told him things I had carried for years, not to punish him, but because he had finally created a space where I felt like the truth could land without breaking something. He listened. He did not argue or explain or redirect. He just listened. By the end of the call, something had changed between us. Not everything, not instantly, but something. My mother, during this period, was doing something I recognized from long experience but was watching with new eyes. She was testing the perimeter. When you stop being as available as you used to be, people who relied on your availability will often probe around the edges to see if there is another way in. They may become more affectionate than usual. They may bring up old positive memories. They may mention things they need in a casual tone that is designed to see if you will offer. Donna did all of these things. She called me one afternoon just to say she had found a photo of the two of us from when I was about 9, a vacation we took to the lake, and that I had looked so happy in it and she wanted me to have it. It was a kind gesture, or it contained a kind gesture wrapped around something else. I said thank you and I meant it. The photo was real and the memory in it was real, and I accepted both of those things. She mentioned twice that her knee had been bothering her more and that it was hard to manage the grocery shopping. I said I was sorry to hear that and asked if she had spoken to her doctor. I did not offer to do her grocery shopping. She mentioned it again a week later. I asked if she had looked into grocery delivery services and offered to help her set one up if she wanted. She said she would think about it. She called me the day before my biggest client presentation to tell me that she wanted to talk about Grand B's situation because she felt she had been left out of the planning. I said, Mom, I have a very big work deadline tomorrow and I cannot give this conversation the attention it needs right now. Can we schedule a call for later this week? She paused and then said, Of course, I do not want to bother you. I said she was not bothering me, I just needed to prioritize correctly. We scheduled the call. She did not bring up being left out when we had it. She mostly asked about Grand B's health and I answered, and it was fine. Fine was a different category than before. Fine used to mean I was holding everything tightly enough that it passed for ease. Fine now meant things were actually settling into a more honest shape. It was not warm necessarily, it was honest, and honest felt better than performance. In June, about 7 months after Thanksgiving, something happened that my mother had not planned for and that she handled in a way that I think showed me, finally and completely, how she understood the dynamic between us. My business was profiled in a regional small business publication. It was not a cover story. It was a feature in a section about women-owned businesses making significant growth in the area. There was a photo, a summary of what I did, a quote from one of my clients, and a mention of how I had grown the business from a solo operation to a small team serving clients across multiple states. Granby called me the morning it came out and said she had it on her coffee table. She said she was going to call the magazine and request 5 extra copies. I laughed more genuinely than I had in a while. Marcus texted me immediately and said, Patricia, this is incredible. I am so proud of you. I sent it to Sonia. She says you are her role model now. I texted back a laughing face and a genuine thank you. My father called and left a voicemail that was slow and a little awkward in the way his voicemails always are, but he said he had seen the article and he wanted me to know he thought I had built something real. He said your mother and I are proud of you. He said your mother is proud of you. He said it twice, which told me something. My mother did not call. She did not text. She did not send a message. She said nothing to me directly for 4 days. On the 4th day, she posted a photo on her personal social media page. The photo was of the article. Her caption said, So proud of my daughter Patricia and all she has accomplished. We knew she would do great things. We knew. We knew she would do great things. I read that caption and I understood something I had been trying to articulate for 34 years. My mother was not indifferent to my success. She was threatened by the version of it that existed outside of her narrative. When she could claim credit, she claimed it. When she could not, she stayed silent. And when the silence became publicly noticeable, she reached for ownership anyway. We knew. I did not comment on the post. I did not share it. I did not like it. I let it sit exactly where she had put it. The summer was a period of consolidation for me. My business was stable and growing. My relationship with Marcus had shifted into something that felt more like an actual sibling dynamic, with honesty on both sides. I had begun therapy earlier in the year with a woman who specialized in adult children navigating complicated family systems, and the work we were doing was giving me language for things I had always felt but never quite found words for. I was not trying to cut my family off. I was not building a wall. I was building something more specific than a wall. I was building clarity. Clarity is different from coldness. Clarity means you can see what is actually happening instead of what you hope is happening. Clarity means you stop filling in the blanks with the most generous possible explanation when the actual explanation is staring right at you. Clarity means you can love people and also see them accurately and also make decisions based on what you know instead of what you wish. I loved my mother. I want to say that plainly because I think it matters. I was not trying to destroy our relationship. I was trying to make it real. Real means both people in it are honest. Real means the person who has been doing more does not pretend to be doing less so the other person feels comfortable. Real means when someone calls you a burden, you do not absorb it as truth just to keep the peace. I was also in the process of learning that I did not need my mother's recognition to know what I had done. Gran B's house with the grab bars in the bathroom and the medical alert system was evidence. My business profile in that magazine was evidence. The 2 hours of honest conversation with Marcus was evidence. I had been accumulating evidence for years that I was capable, caring, and worthy of the kind of love that does not come with conditions. I was just finally allowing myself to read that evidence instead of looking away from it. August brought something I had not seen coming. My parents announced that they were considering selling their house. This was a bigger shift than it sounds. They had lived in that house for 27 years. It was the house Marcus and I had grown up in. My mother had strong feelings about the house and its connection to her social identity in the neighborhood. But their finances, which had been strained for years in ways my parents were not fully transparent about, had apparently reached a point where the math was becoming difficult. The house had also appreciated significantly, and selling it would give them a substantial cushion. The announcement came via the family group chat, which by now had a different feeling than it used to. The group chat had been quieter since I had stopped being the person who drove most of its activity. There was no longer a weekly family update email to respond to, no organized birthday card coordination, no one pulling the family into its own shape. The group had become more organic, which meant more sporadic, which meant most of the time it was quiet. My mother's message was short: Dad and I are thinking about selling the house. Nothing decided yet, just letting you both know. Marcus responded immediately with questions. Where would they go? Had they talked to a realtor? Had they worked out the financial picture? I waited to see what else would emerge. What emerged over the following 2 weeks was that my parents had not fully worked out the picture. They had a vague idea of what they might want, which was a smaller place with lower maintenance, but the actual logistics of a move at their age with my mother's health considerations were more complicated than they had initially framed it. My mother began calling Marcus more frequently. I noticed that he was also beginning to reach toward me in that same probing way. More calls than usual, mentions of stress, mentions of feeling overwhelmed. I was kind on those calls. I was present and I asked reasonable questions and I said I hoped they could find a good path forward, but I did not offer to take the project on. I had made a deliberate choice about where my energy was going, and that choice was not permanent self-removal from my family, but it was a permanent end to me volunteering as the first and primary solution to every problem. Eventually, my parents did make progress. They hired a realtor. Marcus helped them look at a few smaller homes and one condo complex. I went with them to view one property at my mother's specific request, a 2-bedroom condo with a good layout and manageable upkeep. It was right for them, I said so honestly. Standing in that condo with my parents, my mother turned to me and said, "What do you think, Patricia?" And there was something in her voice I had not heard in a long time. She was not testing me. She was not framing me. She was asking me, just asking me the way you ask someone whose judgment you actually trust. I looked around the space and I said, "I think it is a smart choice. Good light, manageable size, close to everything you need. If you like it, I think you should take it." She looked at me and she nodded. She said, "I think so too." That was one of the quieter moments in the whole story. Nobody watching would have known it was significant, but it was. In September, my mother called me on a Tuesday afternoon. I was between client calls and I had about 40 minutes, so I picked up and settled in. She started with routine things: how I was doing, how the business was going. She asked about Gran B and I gave her an update. And then she said she wanted to say something and she was not sure how to say it, which from my mother was already unusual because she is usually very sure how to say things. She said, "Patricia, I have been thinking about Thanksgiving." She paused. I kept quiet and let her continue. She said, "I said something at the table that I think was wrong. I think I embarrassed you and I think I embarrassed myself and I would like to say I am sorry for it." I was quiet for a moment, not because I was trying to make her uncomfortable, because I was making sure I was receiving it clearly, actually receiving it, not just cataloging it as another thing that happened. I said, "I appreciate you saying that, Mom." She said, "I do not always know how to show that I am proud of you. I find it easier to point out what I wish were different than to just say what is working. That is something I have done my whole life and I know it has not been fair to you." I said it has not been, and I said it kindly, but I said it because it was true and because I was no longer in the business of protecting her from true things. She said she knew. She said she was getting older and she found herself thinking more about things she wished she had handled differently. She said she did not want us to drift apart. I said I do not want that either. And then I said I need you to understand that the relationship I want with you has to have room for me in it. Not just room for what I can do for you or how I can help, but room for who I actually am. I need to know that when I tell you something I am proud of, you are able to be proud with me. There was a long pause, and then she said, I want to try that. Not I promise, not of course I can, I want to try that. Which was, for my mother, more honest than any promise would have been. I said, okay, then let us try. The months that followed were not a fairy tale. My mother did not transform. She still sometimes said things in a tone that had edges. She still sometimes found it easier to point out what was missing than to acknowledge what was there. She still occasionally made Marcus's name bigger in stories where my hands were the ones that had done the work. These things did not vanish completely. Old patterns have deep roots. But there were also real changes. She called to congratulate me when I signed the large regional client. Not after my father told her to or after Marcus suggested it. She called herself and she said, Patricia, Marcus told me about your new contract. That is a real accomplishment. I am proud of you. I said thank you and I meant both words. She started asking my opinion in a different register. Not testing, not managing, just asking. What did I think about this specialist she was considering? What did I think about the condo timeline? What did I think about Grand B's care schedule going into winter? The questions were practical, but they carried something new in them. They carried the assumption that I had good judgment worth consulting, that I was not the difficult one, not the burden, not the project. That I was the daughter who knew things and had worked hard and could be trusted. These shifts were not dramatic, they were quiet and gradual and real. And I want to say something clearly about that because I think it matters for anyone listening who is in the middle of their own version of this story. The goal was never to break my mother. The goal was never to be the one who won a war. The goal was a relationship that had enough honesty in it to be worth having. That is harder to build than conflict. It requires more patience and more clarity and more willingness to stay present with uncomfortable truths. But it is the only thing that actually lasts. I kept my business growing, I kept my house. I kept the life I had built from the inside out without permission, without easy support, without someone clearing the path. I kept caring for Granby. I kept being honest with Marcus. I kept showing up in the ways that felt real to me, and I stepped back from the performances that had cost me so much for so long. I was not perfectly healed. I still noticed the old pull sometimes, the reflex to over-explain, to overgive, to smooth things over before anyone got uncomfortable. But I was no longer running on that reflex automatically. I was making choices, real ones. There is one more moment I want to tell you about, because it is the one that made everything feel complete in a way I had not expected. It was December, just over a year after that Thanksgiving. My parents had moved into the condo. Gran B was steady at home with her care schedule in place. Marcus and Sonia were coming through town, and someone suggested we do a small holiday dinner together. We decided to do it at Gran B's house because Gran B wanted to host, and she had the energy for it, and her neighbor Margaret had offered to help with the setup. It was smaller than Thanksgiving the year before. 7 people around a table that fit 7 comfortably. Gran B's food, her recipes, her house smelling like it always had, like something warm and specific and irreplaceable. Toward the end of the evening, Gran B tapped her glass and said she wanted to say something. She was 90 years old and she had the authority of someone who had been watching this family for all of its generations and knew exactly what she saw. She said she wanted to acknowledge the people in this family who held things together quietly, who did the work without the noise, who showed up when showing up was hard and kept showing up after it had been taken for granted. She did not say my name. She did not have to. She looked at me in a way that meant everything the words described and more. My mother looked at me too, and she nodded, a small, real nod, the kind you give when you are not performing anything, the kind you give when you just agree with something true. I looked at Gran B and I smiled and I said, thank you for saying that. And Granby said, thank you for giving me something to say. We had dessert after that. The conversation moved and shifted the way it does when people are actually comfortable with each other. There was laughter, real laughter, not the performed kind. My mother told a story about when Marcus was 7 and she laughed at the part she was supposed to laugh at, and so did everyone else. My father made a gentle joke and looked surprised that it landed. Marcus and I sat beside each other, and at one point he quietly said, good year, Patricia. I said, yeah, it was. It was not a perfect family. It was not a fixed family. It was a family that had been asked to be a little more honest by one person who finally refused to be what she had been called. A burden. Not anymore. I want to close by saying something to you directly, because if you have made it this far in this story, it is probably because some part of it sounds familiar. Maybe you have been the one who kept the peace. Maybe you have been the one who organized and remembered and drove and planned and stayed quiet when someone said something that cut right through you. Maybe you have been the one people called reliable in public and difficult in private. Maybe you have been told, directly or indirectly, that your needs are a lot. That your feelings complicate things. That the family runs better when you are accommodating things instead of asking for things. What I want to say is this: the burden in any family system is almost never the person who keeps showing up. The burden is the gap between what someone gives and what they receive. That gap is not fixed. It is a choice made again and again by the people who benefit from it. And you, the one reading this or listening to this, have every right to stop choosing it, not in anger, not to break everything, but to build something real in its place. Patricia did not win by being louder. She did not win by leaving. She won by becoming clear, by knowing her own value without waiting for someone else to announce it, by redirecting her energy toward the people and the work and the life that returned what she put in, by becoming quietly and completely unavailable to the version of the story where she was the problem. That is the only kind of winning worth having. And it is available to anyone brave enough to say 4 quiet words to the person who expects you to absorb whatever they put down. Not anymore, thank you. If Patricia's story touched something you have been carrying quietly, I want to hear from you in the comments. Tell me about the moment you realized that staying silent was costing you more than speaking would. Tell me about the table you sat at, the words you heard, the thing you swallowed to keep someone else comfortable. Or tell me about the moment you finally said something back, calmly, clearly, and without apology. Patricia found her 4 words after 34 years. What are yours? Leave them below, and if you know someone who needs to hear this story today, send it to them. They will know why.